Hey guys, welcome back. This is Phil from underKG.com. So we're going to take a look at Sony Xperia XZ Premium. So this is a successor to the XZ. I have done a review of the XZ here, there, right. Design-wise, there isn't really much of the differences. It's the classic Sony design. Too much of a classic maybe. It's got a glossy front and back. This one is called the Deep Sea Black. The other color is the Luminous Chrome, and there might be a new color coming soon. The red one was on the talk. Anyway, this is the front and rear. And both of them have the Gorilla Glass 5, so they are scratch resistant. Overall, it's got enough of the premium feel. It's got reflections, so you can use it as like halfway pseudo mirror if you want to. Anyway, when it's lying down on a flat surface, this looks gorgeous. Overall build quality is also good, and just like any other flagship Sony Xperia, it is IP68 water and dust resistant, but there are phones with the mil-spec certifications, so I guess this isn't really that surprising by 2017 standards. And as a lot of folks have pointed out, the bezels on left, right, top, and bottom are pretty thick. It's not necessarily a deal breaker for me, but comparing that to the Galaxy S8 SA Plus or the LG G6, you might get largely disappointed. The power key and the fingerprint reader combo right there has a recessed design, so your finger rests more easily and conveniently over the reader right there. It's got a better performance than the predecessors, but it definitely isn't one of the best. But thankfully, volume button is now in a better position where it used to be right there, somewhere very inaccessible for your both left and right hand. This is a lot easier to access, and surprisingly enough, there is no camera bump. I too thought this was a bumpy camera on the photo, but it actually is not. It's completely flat. And just like many of the modern smartphones, even if you get a dual SIM model, you cannot use the dual SIM and the microSD card expansion in the same time. Overall, the design itself is literally years old. While the new choices and modifications tend to make success, I personally am getting a little sick of this design, and I think it's pretty much time for a full-scale change. What Sony was particularly proud of was the display. It's got a 5.5 inch of 4K UHD display. Now that's quadruple of Full HD. That's even higher than the QHD for the most of the phones. And this is one gorgeous display. The resolution itself is not that impressive since you are not going to be seeing that most of the time since it runs most of the operations in Full HD. Thankfully, unlike the Z5 Premium, this guy supports the YouTube 4K. And even if you're watching a lower resolution content, you can choose between professional, standard, and super vivid mode of color gamut, and there is white balance mode, along with the video image enhancer that works pretty good, although it's not exactly my favorite. It sharpens the image too much, but overall the display is terrific. One minor complaint is the outside legibility. I've seen better, but I can deal with it. Now, the audio division raises a few questions. Yes, it does have the 3.5mm headphone jack. That's a good thing, although I would have preferred it on the bottom. It does have one still. That's what it counts. The audio effect that Sony was very proud of. There is clear bass, DSE-HX, and the overall equalizers. And the thing is, they only work in the built-in Sony Music app. There are also a very limited number of apps where you can use this fascinating apps and effects, but these are getting more and more limited as they update the Android software. The speaker effect used to work in any part of the system, now it also only works with the Sony Music app. And considering that the older Xperias used to have the global sound effect and Samsung Galaxy still has the global sound effect, this seems like a terrible mistake in part of Sony. By the way, that stereo speaker is good, although I've heard better from HTC 10 and Huawei P9 Plus. Moving on to the camera, there are a number of ways that you can launch it. You can press the power key quickly twice, or you can use that two-step shutter key, tap and hold down it, and it's gonna launch the camera. It launches fairly fast, and focusing is pretty fast as well. It's pretty fast with predictive autofocus, although it does not necessarily mean that autofocus is always accurate. Details are there, and results are mostly positive unless you go to the lower lighting environments. They're quite noisy and lacking detail, falling behind the competition. Now, one of the bigger selling points of the Xperia XZ Premium is the video super slow motion. Thanks to the memory stacked up camera sensor, it can take up to 960 frames per second. Now, the thing is, it's only a second that you can take with the 960 frames. With the resolution limited to HD, you can start taking a video, and when you want to use the super slow motion, there's a scene. And that is your only chance that you can capture that impressive moment that you want a super slow motion on. It's not like the usual slow motion where you can take the whole footage and then choose the part where you want to slowly play. You have to capture the exact moment, and that is even going to be limited to merely a second, so you have to be very precise. If you want more flexible, conventional, shoot it all and edit it later, then there's a slow motion, but you're only going to have 120 frames per second. Overall, it's a very tricky feature to use even if you know exactly when it's gonna happen. It's pretty fun and impressive when you get the shot right, like once in 20 trials, but even then the video is very unclear and noisy in lower lighting conditions. Compared to that, front-facing camera is pretty good with autofocus even on the front camera. The system is pretty solid. It's got Snapdragon 835 and 4GB of RAM is pretty much the standard. It doesn't overwhelm in any part, but overall system operation is very smooth and pretty snappy. The system interface has a very stockish Android, although it is missing a few parts from stock Android Nougat, it still is not that much of a heavy skin. One of my favorite new things was the new lock screen clock. If you don't like it, you can switch to the older clock or the even older clock, but Sony does have to work on the analog clock. It's horrendous. By the way, I wasn't too happy to find out that I cannot remove that ugly VLT icon, and I still don't get why clear all button on the multitasking panel has to be on top, which is harder to access than on the bottom. And running up the whole thing is a 30-30 mAh of battery built in. Surprisingly enough, it managed to give me about 5 hours to 5.5 hours of screen on time. I use it on the full LTE network all the time. I surf the web for most of the time, so if you have more of a standard common usage pattern like more Wi-Fi, less web surfing, then you should be able to use it for, I don't know, an hour more. Charging is done by the USB Type-C port on the bottom, and surprisingly it took really long, 3.5 hours, even with the Quick Charge 3.0 enabled charger. And yes, that was with the battery care turned off. But still, charging only for 40 minutes is going to give you a half full battery, so it's no biggie. Now, before I get to the verdict, there is one thing that I have to tell you, and that is the heat management. It's got a Snapdragon 835 octa-core processor, which is not exactly known for the overheating problem like the Snapdragon 810 or 808, and it does have the overheating problem. It was serious in the earlier build of software, but after the update, it's gotten better, and it's nothing serious, but it still does generate more heat than other Snapdragon 835 or equivalent processor-equipped devices. Overheating was a common problem with a lot of Sony phones, and I'm surprised to see that Sony still is struggling with those kind of issues. Now, getting down to the bottom line, the verdict. I would have to summarize that the Xperia XZ Premium is a pretty good package for Sony fans, diehard Sony fans, but largely unappealing for the others. Overall, the phone screams out that it's a classic Sony Xperia with latest technologies. But even with that 4K screen is not fully utilized because Sony does not have its own VR platform. The bezels covering around it are pretty thick, and design is almost getting boring, cameras are not that great, speaker is mediocre, and audio effects are getting more and more limited. I will say that the phone itself is not bad, but as I always say, this is a free market economy, not fully. But free market economy guarantees competition. I'm not really sure if you want to pay $799 for this literally years-old design and bad heat management. I'm a Sony fan, so I can forgive and still like the XZ Premium, but if you're not, I would have to strongly advise you to think twice. So that was a quick look at the Xperia XZ Premium. It's an impressive piece of smartphone in a few different radical ways. Thank you always for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. You can always meet us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. And this was the Deep Sea Black Xperia XZ Premium. Thanks. We'll see you guys later. Ciao.